Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. The top prize for the naval side of Summer Extreme is the HMS Renown, a battle cruiser coming in for Britain. I thought we'd have a look at it and its Devblog in a little bit more detail. With it coming in, it's definitely one of those I've been looking forward to, just because it is a very much well-known ship when it comes to Britain, and also is one of those which is always in all of the fake leak lists, and now we're going to have to put in the Repulse instead of the Renown when people decide to make those lists. So, this is going to be a rank 5 event vehicle, so it's going to be the highest tier in naval, which means it's only going to be effectively grinding out rank 4 and 5, which kind of sucks. But at the same time, it gives you another vehicle to run with the other British vehicles they put at those BRs. This is more of a refit version as well, so it won't just have to rely on its heavy guns to pack a punch against most vehicles. Let's get into the history of the HMS Renown. The Renown was the lead ship in a series of 2 Royal Navy battlecruisers armed with 381mm main guns built at the end of the First World War, during which both ships saw limited use. The HMS Renown took an active part in the events of the Second World War. The ship was on missions in the North Sea, and for a long time was engaged in escorting Maltese convoys, provided long-range cover for the Arctic convoys to the USSR, and participated in the Allied landings in Africa. While serving in the Indian Ocean, she became the flagship of the Eastern Fleet and took part in attacks on Japanese bases in the Philippines, and at the very end of the war, even became the flagship of the home fleet. The cruiser was decommissioned in 1946, and soon after scrapped in 1948. The funny thing about this Devblog is the 2 first paragraphs of the Devblog are actually stuck in the history section instead of where they actually should be. I was wondering why it was odd, because, you know, in the Devblog they started off talking about the 114mm guns to start with, which just seemed like a really weird one, and also didn't really mention its main battery, and that's because the mentions are actually in the history page, so somebody needs to fix that, since it is kind of silly. So the main battery of the Renown is 6 381mm guns. These are in dual mounts, 2 on the front of the ship and 1 on the back, and that means that it's got a pretty juicy ammo rack on the front of it to be able to take out, but also means that it can pack a decent amount of firepower. Not as much as a lot of the other vehicles that are around in the game, but enough to be able to deal some damage, especially against cruisers and stuff like that. It also will be presented in its 1944 refit. Now, what this does is it's added in 10 twin universal mounts of 114mm guns, and these obviously will be used for pretty much everything. They do call them like more universal cannons, but for me these ones are always better to pepper ships with and not necessarily aircraft. Then it has a bunch of 40mm pom-pom guns on it all over the place, and also twin-barreled 20mm. This thing should be completely covered in those setups. The only question is, will they be the octuple 40s or will they just be the quad? Looking at the video and also some of the images, looks like it might be a mixture of both, especially on the front, but mainly quads around the place. The octuple 40 is one of my favorite looking guns in the game. It just looks fantastic with all of them just kind of sat out there. The other thing is this vehicle has access to 1,400 crew members, so that means that its general survivability won't be too bad, and at the same time, it does also it can also go around 30 knots, which is quite nice. And it does also have torpedo tubes, weirdly enough, on the vehicle. But it does have a downside, and this is more of a downside with the general history of these types of machines. But the main issue is its armor. Around the time when the dreadnoughts were being built, and also these vehicles were being made, what ended up happening is battlecruisers were designed as a lighter version of a battleship, which would have the same firepower, therefore be able to put out the same punch, but also not really be designed to take a punch. So you'll be able to get the first shots off, you would be able to be more mobile to get away from the guns, and therefore you would be able to survive, so use mobility over armor. In actual real life, especially during stuff like Jutland and also other engagements, this was kind of shown to be false. So it didn't exactly work like that, and therefore the battlecruiser always would kind of lose out to the battleship, and the Renown would be no different, especially in War Thunder. Its major weakness is, of course, its armor belt. It has a 229mm armored belt, which seems okay, but also a 102mm armored deck, which may save it against bombs and stuff like that. But when you actually have a look at the penetration of a lot of shells, which are at the highest echelon of the game, 229mm is not going to do a lot. It's really not going to help you survive. And with that huge ammo rack in the front for those two massive turrets, it's going to be very obvious where to shoot this thing at the end of the day. Like, there's not going to be many people who are going to look at this and be like, yeah, you know what, I feel like I'm just going to shoot it in the center where the engines are and everything will be fine. Now, you'll have a massive stinking ammo rack in the middle of it to go after. So yeah, that's going to be a bit of a problem. Not as bad as some of the French battleships which are around, though. Those ones are kind of nuts with what they have issues with. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to see those vehicles about. There's also the fact that the Renown is putting in like the late Second World War setup. That means that there's hope for an early war setup, or even a 1916 setup, and also the Repulse. You know, the Repulse was one of those vehicles that was, part of the same class, the Renown class battlecruisers, but the Repulse didn't survive the war. It was actually sunk by Japanese bombers in 1941, so it wasn't able to actually get access to the refit that the Renown did. So what may actually happen is we may get an earlier war Repulse, or even a 1916 Repulse for the tech tree, and the Renown as the event vehicle. This would mean that the event vehicle is better than the standard tech tree one, but as long as they're different BRs, it wouldn't really worry me too much. As a person who has been slowly but surely getting through a lot of the naval stuff, moving into rank 4 and 5 of many nations, I've started to run into a lot of these battle cruisers, and I'm not too afraid of them compared to the lighter cruisers or heavier cruisers around the 6.0 with rapid fire guns which can just annihilate things. The main issues is when you run into battleships and your guns start not really doing a ton of damage. At least the Renown will be able to penetrate battleships, it will be able to do some damage to them, but the real question is with it, is it going to stand up against them, especially when people start firing back? And unfortunately, at least if my limited experience means anything, the answer will be no. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Millie Draper, Juan the Panda, Nick R. Kupila, Carrion Crow, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Merciless Reaper, Orange Tail, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Moxie B. Young, Peter Grayling, Jerry Provolt, Bareen, Alan Hacker, Sem Arslan, Uncle Bean, Derek R., and Lafouche for supporting the channel.